John Rule.
Now Jay entered into a fun period riding with his father on the paper bundle delivery route. First to the big town and the loading dock of the Times, then at the first town maybe a bun and milk for him while his dad had coffee and a donut. TM had a nice second-hand suit he wore now, mostly on weekends in Tyler, and often bought a couple of King Edward cigars to stick in their hanky pocket in their shiny cellophane wrappers. Coming down the sidewalk in his snap-brimmed fedora, he looked really spiffy, Vida remarked. Sometimes he wore the vest, too. Too soon for Jay, each trip became an endless drone of motor and hum of tires on concrete, blacktop, or gravel, while his dad's grainy, companionable voice blended in and dragged him toward sleep. He fought it, and at first the sights and sounds, the stinks and steams, the walking beams, and the garish pumping stations kept him roused and alert. Then at times the drama of a puncture or a blowout would interrupt. Blang! Wee, wee, wee! Flump, 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 flump. TM would curse and steer for the shoulder, then run to get the jack and the tools, a patch kit, tire boots, rubber bandages, and set to work. But then they would be back on the road again. His dad would hit the steering wheel hard with his hand and say, "My jacks, that was unlucky. Now where was I?" and plunge into his monologue. "Well, Dad moved us to Oklahoma, and we rented a ranch next to Uncle Bill's." And Jay would fight gravity again and drift away in clouds of TM's endless reminiscence. His dad did try to break the monotony. Once a trip, after he dropped a bundle, he might say, "How about a cream soda or a chocolate milk?" and pull around to the local ice plant. Jay could sit up and watch a dripping ice wagon be loaded as the horses stamped and shifted, big chunks skidding past insulated doors and thudding off the dock, handled fast by a man with tongs and a leather back apron. His dad would come back with little milk bottles, cold and beaded, and pull out the cardboard lids before starting off again. Then one day in late summer, Jay was told he wouldn't go with his dad. They sent him off early to play with Dale. "Don't come by home for dinner. You can eat with them. Dale's mother knows about it." This seemed mysterious, but when they sent him home at last, he heard a new noise in the house that came from a sturdy, red-faced, round-headed baby brother. His folks acted very happy and began to visit Vida's family in Tyler a lot. Aunt Lois took pictures of everyone. She was getting better with her printing and tinting, and did two of Jay she was real proud of. One of Jay posed blowing bubbles that always embarrassed him, and another of him holding Matt, his new brother, already so fat he had to grunt to hold him up. Jay was distressed at having to hold babies. His dad had a crow to pick with Vida. He wanted Matt to be a junior, but Vida got the names turned around. "My gosh, Vida, how could you tell him Matthew Theodore instead of Theodore Matthew? You weren't there, and I wasn't myself at the time, big boy. At least he won't have to suffer under Junior all his life." Now Jay was able to go back to riding with his dad again. It was a pattern he'd gotten used to. He knew all of his dad's stories now. Try as he might, he was still almost painfully sleepy in the last half of the trip. It didn't matter to his dad, who went right on talking and didn't notice until they reached home. Jay would be asleep and limp as a rag by that time. His dad would reach across to drag him out with the ankles and carry him in. Jay was really settled into the daily bundle delivery trip. It was like he was doing his part, working with his dad, though now he mostly dozed or slept on the last half of each trip. This lasted until chance and physics intervened. One night near New London, he was lying in his usual trance in the corner of the seat, lulled by the motor in his dad's endless drone. They were just passing a gas pumping station when all changed. He was whirling, then a noise in his head, and then nothing. When he came back, he was sitting in some hard ruts by the highway, dizzily rubbing his crown. In the darkness, the lights, the motor noise, and the spinning ventilators on the long metal building across the way shocked him, like gigantic cackling chickens. Far up the gentle rise of the highway, and shrinking steadily away, was a dim halo of yellow light. In its center was a dark blob with a tiny red dot. Vaguely, he sensed that the blob was the roadster, about to go over the rise and out of sight. At that moment, a distant squeal of brakes came as the light swung violently around. The yellow beams flared bright and dodged over to the near lane. The motor rose to a scream as the lights veered off the road, bouncing crazily straight at him, and stopped in a cloud of dust. A shadow flashed across the light, and he felt arms around him, and saw for the second time in his young life the shine of tears on that face. Hands ran swiftly over his limbs and body, his face, fingers palped his skull, parted his hair. Son, are you all right?" He nodded dumbly. "Let's see, turn your head more." Then a gusty breath. "Well, thank God, you got just a little bitty cut on top." As soon as they reached home, his folks checked him over for broken bones or scrapes hidden by clothing. Then they put him to bed after supper early, though he wasn't tired. The iodine on his head sure waked him up. Vida thought mercurochrome wasn't good enough. He kicked off the light cover and listened to them in the kitchen. "Ted, for God's sake, you came within an ace of losing that child. He could have gone under the wheel or hit the highway wrong." "I know that, Vida. I know that damn baling wire." "It's not the baling wire. It's this whole way we're living." "Yeah, well, hell, I don't see any way of getting off the road for a while. We're saving a little money. And maybe we can try something on the side, see if it works." Something on the side meant that they moved into Overton the next month and into a small house on the main paved street. His folks decided to set up a small cafe, a place that Vida could watch over while Ted continued the bundle route. His dad quickly went to work on the full porch and turned it into a diner with counter stools from a used restaurant place in Tyler. Vida sought out used chinaware and kitchen stuff. Jay's dad found a square of quarter-inch steel for a grill to cook on. He also made a round sign he mounted on a pole by the street. It said simply, "Eats," on a green background in red and white letters with elaborate serifs. Most startling of all to Jay was that two of his dad's brothers showed up, both looking for work. Uncle James, the one next in age to his dad, and Uncle Billy, the next to youngest. Jay bothered Uncle James by getting close to stare at the scar between his eyes from a childhood accident when James came up behind Jay's father as he chopped on a footlog. Jay had to squint hard to distinguish the scar from the frown lines. Both uncles were solemn young men who frowned a lot. Uncle James soon left for Oklahoma, but Uncle Billy stayed, put on an apron and a white cap, and cooked for the customers out front. Jay liked him because he had been good to Jay back on the home farm. Besides, he had a beautiful pearly accordion with colored jewels on it. After work, he would play "Sweet Hour of Prayer" and other church songs on it, real low. While he was there, he went to church on Sundays. He acted even older than Jay's dad. When they were younger, his older brothers had called him the Jew, just as they had put a shame nickname on Harley, the youngest, for being hungry all the time, Wimpy. Now Jay finally began school and was glad to at last. His folks took him there the first day to get started. He trusted the teacher, who talked to them a lot at first, real cheerful. They were taught lots of songs about Texas. They sang first, "Texas, my Texas," "The Yellow Rose of Texas," and one about the eyes of Texas being on you, "You can't get away," which was kind of scary. And then they sang the Star-Spangled Banner and did the Pledge of Allegiance, and then they could get out their library paste and blunt scissors and construction paper and learn something. Jay was excited to be around so many kids his own age. He had especially noticed a pretty and bright little girl in his class named Becky Underwood. She was tanned and pink with short blonde hair. He'd even had a sinful dream about her appearing in nothing but smooth tanned skin and pink panties. He knew it was sinful to think like that. On this sunny afternoon, he came home along the usual path, one that ran between and behind houses and board fences on a high bank that dropped down just beyond their living quarters. Hopping happily along and half singing her name under his breath like poetry, "Becky Underwood, Becky Underwood," he soon reached a drop-off, ran down the slope to the back door, and let himself in, heading for the bedroom to leave his jacket and primer book. But the door was locked. This was odd in mid-afternoon. Automatically, he stooped a bit and peered through the keyhole. His head bumped the knob. The keyhole framed the figure of a pretty dark-haired young woman standing naked by his parents' bed. She held a piece of clothing in her hand. He stared amazed at the dark furred area between her thighs. His head bumped the knob again, and she bent to look at the door. He jerked his eye away and ran back outside to ponder this. Who was she? What was she doing? Where were his folks? Maybe he better go back up the path and wait a bit, then come back. He climbed the bank to the path again and wandered along the back lots. At once he spotted a really big carved wood whiskey stopper. Gee, this was a real find. He sniffed it and began to scan the path and its margins intently. He admired his find again, then sensed someone coming and looked up. It was his enemy, the much bigger boy who lived nearby and had already tried to cow him. He grinned at Jay. So there you are, you little shrimp. I got you now. Too fast for thought, Jay drew back and hit the bully between the eyes with the stopper, then whirled and ran. It must have stunned the big kid, but he let out a bellow and charged in pursuit. In seconds, they pounded down the trail and reached the drop-off. Instantly, Jay fell flat and heard the other yell as he half-tripped, sailed over, and bounced down the rough slope. In a flash, Jay was up, down to the door, and inside. And almost ran into his dad, red-faced and angry-looking as he came from the diner part. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "What's wrong? What have I done?" Jay wondered. "I've been looking everywhere for you. I told you to come straight from school, young man, and I meant it." He snatched a split stick from the stovewood box, grabbed Jay's left arm, and struck his legs as Jay scuttled to escape like a bird on a string. It hurt all right. The first lick did, the second one less, and the third barely touched him as his father seemed to sense some danger. He turned Jay loose, threw the stick violently into the wood box, and added, "And don't you forget it." Crying a little, Jay limped through the open doorway to the bedroom. Another mystery. They moved again to a small group of houses on higher ground at one edge of town. His dad had gotten a hive of bees from his friend, Mr. Sharpknife, and he put it up on the house roof when they moved in. It was a chilly day when bees are restive. Jay got a bee up his pants and got stung. Jay got invited over by the neighbor kids next door and enjoyed sitting at the table with them and talking about his family's moves. One of his school friends lived down the slope near the school. Jay went down to play with him after school. They had fun making bows and arrows from privet hedge. And once his Uncle Billy took him alone to a small white church down the dirt street. Jay sat in a pew at the back and listened to his uncle, hidden away in a room behind the altar, playing the service on his accordion. It now seemed that they were out of the diner business, and Uncle Billy left to go back to Kansas. But then his dad decided to move them again, this time to Arp, which he said would be more convenient for his newspaper bundle route, their main source of income. This time they moved into a tiny trailer house parallel to the dirt street. Jay felt anxious about everything as Christmas got closer and closer. His birthday was on the 12th, and his gift was tiny black cowboy boots with red and green stitching and cute square toes. For a while he wanted to do everything with them but sleep in them. One cool Saturday, his dad said he might drive out to see Mr. Sharpknife like he promised. Maybe he'd take the rifle along and get a shot at a rabbit or something. Of course, Jay was eager to go along. They trundled over the blacktop until his dad turned into a dirt lane through stunted oak trees, and then presently turned again into a small clearing surrounded by scrub and sumac. Right in front of them was a cabin the size and shape of a small boxcar perched on blocks. Some unpainted beehives stood against a line of scrub at the far end of the grassy opening. As his dad cut the ignition, a man stepped out on the narrow porch, which had just room for a straight chair beside the screen door. Jay scrambled out and hurried after his dad as he went up to shake hands with the smiling older man. "Well, hello, Ted. You finally did get out here again. How's the paper route going?" His dad pulled Jay around in front. "This is my boy, Jay. Jay, this is Mr. Sharpknife." "Oh, well, the route's all right. A lot of driving. Your advice has really helped on the gas expense," he added in a low voice. The man called Sharpknife threw his head back and laughed loudly, then showing his perfect teeth again. Jay had learned about older persons with perfect teeth when his great uncle scared him on the Oklahoma trip by pulling his out and snapping them at him. "Oh, you might as well have a break or two to help you along," Sharp Knife said, still laughing, "especially with a young family. I expect the refineries can stand a few pipeline leaks." Jay's dad glanced around. "Where's your garden plot? How do you get by? I see a few of your hives over there," he added. "Oh, I barter. I swap honey and sell beeswax for canned goods, beans, even smokehouse stuff. If folks have extra. It doesn't take much for an old boy batching it. I've got hives spotted all over the neighborhood. Come on in. I was just knocking more comb frames and supers together." He led the way inside. Jay was already curious about the neat little place. The inside smelled of beeswax and new wood. Pots and tools, a corner workbench, and a small cook stove took up the near end, with bookshelves and a bunk bed farther back. Things hung on screw hooks or fit into niches in the walls. "What's that funny thing?" Jay asked, pointing to a coffee pot with pleated stuff on the handle side hanging from a ceiling brace near the stove pot. Sharp Knife reached for it and squeezed it, wafting smoky air right in his face. "A bee smoker," his dad said. "Don't you remember your Uncle Buck using one on the farm?" "He burnt rags in it," Jay said. Sharp Knife's eyes twinkled. "Right," he said, and sat down quickly on the stool by his workbench. He reached for a box of brads and a tack hammer, pressed 4 pre-cut pine strips into a comb frame, and began tacking the corners. "I've got some foundation sheets to put in these as soon as I get enough made up," he said, and glanced at the cold box heater and the gray enamel coffee pot on it. "Ted, I'd offer you a cup of coffee, but it's all gone." "That's all right. The boy and I were going down to the old Derrick field over here anyway, maybe shoot a rabbit." "I need to get this done today," Sharp Knife said. "I keep Sunday free for reading and thinking and watching my bees. Sometimes I get on my bunk and just read and think all day." He laid the frame atop some other finished ones and stood up. Jay could see that his dad really respected this man, but he'd never heard him ask anyone what he asked next. He asked Mr. Sharp Knife what he'd learned from all his years of living. Sharp Knife threw him a humorous wide-eyed glance and then sobered. "All that people told me before I reached 40, that I could absolutely believe, depend on, I no longer believe. None of it." He stared steadily at them as he said this. Jay's dad thought on this, nodded slightly, and then he asked another. "Well, what do you think about these hard times that we're having even in the oil fields?" "Oh, it was bound to happen after a big glut, people flying so high after the World War. Now they've been down for a while. They're bound to get restless and things start moving soon, up and down, way of the world." "Well, and you've got all you need right here?" "Pretty much. I've been a while here. When I'm ready to move on, I'll get someone to put my cabin and my hives on a truck and I'll try a new spot. Bees can't make honey here in the colder months, can they?" "No, right now they're eating the stores I left for them, but they fly from the hives on warm days to do their business outside. Keeps the hive clean and prevents them from getting bee flu. In a couple of months, enough will be blooming for them to raise new workers and make honey again." He waved to them as they backed out and headed deeper into the scrub. "What a funny man," Jay said, looking back. "Is that his real name?" Well, that's what he goes by," his dad said. "Do you like him?" "Yeah, he's sure got a lot of stuff. Does he have any kids?" "I don't think so. He isn't married. He doesn't even have a dog." "But he's happy, isn't he?" He watched his dad for the response. "Sure seems to be. Happiest man I've met around here." Soon they bumped out into the edge of the abandoned oil fields, a humpy terrain of short regrowth with wooden derricks standing like ghosts above the gulches and the brush. His dad parked by 2 derricks close together, half the crow's nest fallen off the one across the trail and one on this side nearly intact. They had stopped in an open grassy place to turn around with a big patch of prickly pear at one side. His dad told him to wait close to the car while he hunted a big circle from right to left, down to the bottom of the draw and back. "I won't be long. Better not poke around these old rotten derricks." He set off down the track with his quick, light step and went out of sight. Jay stood there by the car fender. To stand, look, and wait for TM was already a pattern. A light breeze fluttered past his ears and ruffled his hair. He was tempted to go closer to the derrick for a look, but he heard a creak from a short crossbeam hanging high up, and guessed it was hanging by a single spike. After a while, a faint uneasiness swelled in him until a sharp crack of a .22 assured him of his dad's progress. He could see only the curve of brush where the hill dropped away, and the far slope with derricks and a puddle of water shining in a slush pit. Here and there a twisted piece of metal or pipe stood out of the soil. Another gun report and a whine came from either farther left. An instant later, a mourning dove pair came whistling past and vanished. In a few minutes, his father's form was visible above the brush farther to the left, moving in his usual clip. "Well, I missed twice, dadgummit," he said as he came up. "Saw a rabbit dusting and missed it. Then those doves lit on a rig too far away. Let's go home." Our Christmas. It was mid-morning, and he was headed downtown in Ark. It was almost Christmas, but not like any Christmas at Grandmother's. His dad mentioned it when he let him out of the old roadster and went on to drive the long route, dropping bundles of the Courier-Times. "Stick these 6 extras under your arm, Jay. Try to sell some for a nickel. It's holiday time. You look pretty spiffy in your new boots. There ought to be more folks in town today." He wished his dad hadn't asked him to do this. His heart sank when they suggested it at breakfast. The very thought of him, just turned 6, asking a strange grown-up to buy something made him shrivel up inside. Still, he stumped on down the path to where a new sidewalk began at the first store, a new Western auto with lots of red paint. Red and green confetti ropes swung in a show window and from the ceiling inside. A bell tinkled on the door as he went in, marched over to a slim, balding man at the register, and looked up defiantly. "Want to buy a paper, mister?" "Afraid not, son." The man smiled briefly and looked away. The doorbell tinkled again as someone came in. Well, that was that. He felt useless and smaller, like he'd shrunk a notch. He lingered by 2 red shopping islands with toys, both with neat glass dividers, just level with his face. He went slowly around the glass with his nose up like a goldfish. Everything smelled and looked brand new, but there wasn't much. Each glass division held only a toy or 2. Some were wind-up toys stamped from thin metal and fastened together with bend tabs. The painted-on faces of the racing car drivers and the pilots stared at him from the cockpits. Winding keys stuck out from their sides. They had tiny price tags tied on with cotton string. Some of the guns were supposed to spit sparks like a machine gun, a Tommy gun. He ached to fool with one, to twist the key and hear the gears buzz, but the owner man of the customer was watching him closely. And once he wheeled and went out with a laughing jingle of the doorbell behind, as he stumped on toward the main intersection. Across the side street was the corner drugstore where he'd been before with his dad. And across the highway street and its companion railroad track was a low wooden hotel building, a converted warehouse with a long window toward the town. Those 2 were his main hope. If he could sell at least one paper, his dad would be proud. He crossed the empty street and went into the glass front drugstore. Opening the door was a little hard, and he had to shift the papers. They kept sliding sideways. An older man was talking to the druggist, a man with thick gray hair and glasses. Jay saw a small stack of newspapers already on the glass counter. His hopes sank, but it was too late. He had to ask. "How about a nickel for a paper, mister?" he said miserably. They both looked down at him kindly, but the druggist pointed at the stack of copies on the counter and said, "Try the hotel." They were already talking again before he reached the door. He had to fumble at the brass thumb latch, lean against the door to get out, and then straighten his papers again before heading across to the hotel. At the one blinking traffic light over the highway, he looked and waited, even though there were no cars much. After he got over, he glanced at his square-toed black cowboy boots, his birthday boots, and saw a scuff place inside the right toe. He bent and rubbed it with his thumb before he climbed the hotel steps. He saw a long, narrow lobby to the left with an old man on a sofa then a raised platform and a registry counter beside narrow steps to the rooms above. As soon as both the old man and the dark-haired young clerk told him no, he went right out and stood by the tracks, staring down the cross street at the half-dozen shops he hadn't visited. Something turned over inside. He wasn't going to. He was through. A wind whistled past and ruffled a few town decorations. Some glittery stuff spiraled on light poles and twisted on guy wires. He crossed again and walked back down the highway until he turned into their own dirt and gravel street, just like the others except the main cross street and the highway. After he passed a half-built church, he could see their rented trailer house, silvery with paint, and already bulging and buckling where the tar paper covering had puffed out. Opposite was a Spanish-style stucco house, white with red tile roof and more empty, grassy lots. Next to their trailer was the landlady's house, unpainted, low, and perched on blocks with linoleum floors inside. He had played with her kids both in and out, and with the boy from the stucco house, jumping back and forth across the deep drain ditches that lined the street. The trailer had a wide slanted board to cross the ditch, and then high steps. He twisted the knob and climbed in. His stepmother was tending to the baby in the cooking and eating end. "Now your face is all wiped clean. Here you go, little man." She gave Matt a measuring cup half full of water. He banged it eagerly and spilled some in his high chair tray. She turned toward Jay as he closed the door. "Did you have any luck?" "No." "So, where did you go?" "Western Auto, the drugstore, and the hotel." "Well, you can help make decorations for the tree." "What tree?" He brightened a little. She laughed. "Oh, he's going to cut us a pine tree on the way back, and I'm going to make popcorn strings. You can help me string it, and we've got some Christmas rope and things." They were at the table stringing popcorn and eating some when they heard the old roadster pull in behind the trailer, and their breadwinner bounded up the steps. "Doop-de-doop-de-doo, how's my baby boy?" His dad snatched up the baby and whirled around, dancing a jig that shook the little trailer. The baby crowed and waved a tiny fat arm. "What's happened, Ted? Watch out for Matt's head." "Oh, nothing much. I've got a puppy in the roadster. I've got a box of Cracker Jack for Jay. I've filled up again with casing head gas for the car, and I've cut us a tree and nailed cross sticks on it." "A puppy, Daddy?" He was up and out, running around the trailer to the parking place. Sure enough, a little fuzzy, brindly pup with darkish muzzle and floppy-tipped tail. He cradled him gently and carried him in. In a minute, the pup was clicking his nails all over the linoleum floor. His father brought in a bushy pine sprout from the rumble seat, filling the whole space with the odor of fresh pine. He pushed it to the back of the rickety table where it stood trembling. "I've got some cotton batting I can put around the bottom," Vida said. She and his dad draped strings of popcorn carefully back and forth over the shiny needles. For the tip-top, Vida cut a rough star from the lid of an oatmeal carton and wrapped tinfoil around it. Then she brought out and opened a red paper bell and red and green paper confetti ropes, which his dad carefully fastened to the ceiling over that half of the trailer. The other end was all bunks and storage. At the last, Vida opened a crumpled brown paper bag and took out a short length of flattened rope tinsel and a handful of mashed foil icicles. "The landlady gave me these, left over from their tree. I want to take Jay back uptown with me for a few minutes. I met the finest, nicest fellow at the hotel the other day. He likes children, said he really misses his family being on the road at Christmas." "Well, okay, Ted, but don't be long. I want to start the hamburger in half an hour, and you said the Headland boy was going to drop by." They hurried back over the dirt path alongside the empty, sketched-out building lots to the start of curbs and sidewalk on the highway.